1 week later, chapter 41. 1 week later, Emily and James returned to the Bayside Press building, this time with Matthew in tow, to meet with Mr. Griswold's assistant, Jack, and discuss their prize for winning Mr. Griswold's scavenger hunt. The Poe manuscript had been turned over to the police at Portsmouth Square, and Emily had no idea what to expect from the meeting. She knew she should be excited. She dreamed of playing a Griswold game, let alone winning one. But she'd felt deflated about the whole thing ever since the run-in with Mr. Remora. The elevator doors opened to the wine and silver blue lobby. So, whenever there's something that's opposite right next to each other in a book, the author is doing what? Do you remember? Contrast and contradictions. The author literally puts both things right next to each other so that you notice that that's an important part. Have you ever wondered, like a teacher says, write down a sticky note where blah, 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 and you're like, I don't know what to write down. Have you had that kind of moment before? Like, what am I supposed to write down? I don't know. Those are some of the ones you can use, and this is definitely a contrast or contradiction. Contradiction is like when you say the opposite of what you just said, okay? And contrasts, you know that from compare contrast, right? Okay, so I just wanted to make sure I say that. Barrett, what's up?
Isn't that also just called being hypocritical?
Being what?
Hypocritical. It's hypocritical. Yeah, same thing.
It can be. It can be. I think, in my mind, being hypocritical is like with nasty intent. Like you know that it's going to be hurtful the way you express it. Does that make sense? And having opposites is more like mixed feelings, right? Like, I feel happy and I feel really sad, right? So that's my take on it, but I see where you're going with that. Okay, I do. Whoa. Did a giant barf cotton candy in here or what? Matthew said. Jack leaned against the receptionist's desk, waiting for them. Just like the first time they met him, he was wearing an Argyle sweater vest. Jack greeted Emily and James with hugs and a handshake for Matthew. Follow me, Jack said, ushering them down the hall. He's eager to talk with you. He who? Emily asked. Jack stopped in front of a set of double doors. It had only just registered that this was Mr. Griswold's office when Jack pushed the doors open, and there was Griswold himself. He sat in a wheelchair, striped in Bayside Press colors, and admired the golden hair medallion still on display around the bust of Edgar Allan Poe. Was she hallucinating? No way, James said. Old book dude, Matthew called out. Emily slugged her brother and then fiddled with the pencil in her ponytail. Her palms felt sweaty and she wiped them on her jeans. Mr. Griswold wheeled himself closer and smiled, his bushy mustache lifting up at the edges. He looked exactly like his photo in the newspaper clipping, but less gray. You must be Emily, James, and Matthew. A pleasure to meet you three. Emily, I understand you have been a Book Scavenger user over the years. You're not in a coma, Emily blurted, then mentally slugged herself. She daydreamed about this moment forever. And that was how she greeted her idol? Mr. Griswold chuckled. Come in, come in. He wheeled back and gestured to the couch nestled between bookcases. We have a lot of catching up to do, don't we? As Emily, James, and Matthew seated themselves in Mr. Griswold's office, Jack perched on the arm of the couch and launched into an explanation. The police suspected from the beginning that the BART station attack was premeditated, he said, largely because none of Mr. Griswold's personal belongings were stolen. Except one important one, Griswold added with a wink. While Mr. Griswold had been in a coma, there had been a security breach at the hospital, and people feared his life was still at risk, so he had been secretly relocated. Hospital staff noticed he was missing, and a rumor spread that he had died, which his team decided not to address until his health stabilized. Hearing this, Emily realized that the Book Scavenger user, Captain Overpants, the one who'd claimed to work in Mr. Griswold's hospital, hadn't been making up the rumor he'd gossiped about. I remember encountering those two men in the BART station. And then the next thing I know, I'm waking up a month later in a strange place with an incredible headache and no recollection of how I got there or any awareness at how much time had passed. Jack has been filling me in on all that transpired. And boy, a lot has transpired. Mr. Griswold's eyes crinkled with kindness as his gaze settled on Emily. I'm setting the record straight about my vitality this afternoon. But after all you've been through, I wanted you to hear the news directly from me first. Emily's mouth hung open. She wasn't sure if she'd closed it once or even taken a breath the entire time Mr. Griswold and Jack had been talking. A mixture of relief and awe swirled inside as she processed that Mr. Griswold was sitting right in front of her. It all seemed a bit dreamlike. I hope you enjoyed my literary treasure hunt, despite Mr. Remora's antics, he said. We did, Emily said, her voice a near whisper. She swallowed and repeated herself more loudly. Mr. Griswold clasped his hands in his lap, studying the Poe bust as he talked. Ever since I learned about my relation to Rufus Griswold and the role he played in Poe's life, I have felt remorse for how my ancestor treated Poe after he died. You see, Rufus took advantage of his position as Poe's literary executor. He altered some of Poe's letters and writings and compiled them into a posthumous biography in an attempt to paint Poe in a very negative light. Why would he do that? James asked. Mr. Griswold shook his head. I'm not sure anyone knows. Rufus's lies and fabrications weren't fully revealed until long after his own death, so he never had to explain himself. He and Poe had a contentious relationship.
Oh, contentious.
Contentious.
Contentious
Yes.
is one of our words.
There you
I
go.
just said that. Yeah.
Toward the end of Poe's life, there was a woman they were both friends with, and so some speculate there was a love triangle in play. Mr. Griswold shook his head once again. I don't know the why, But to go out of your way to spread lies about someone after he has passed away, well, I can only imagine what a sad and bitter man my great-great-great-grandfather must have been. Mr. Griswold dragged a finger across the charms that dangled from the golden hair medallion. When I discovered the Poe manuscript, an idea clicked for me. I had long been a fan of Poe's short story, The Gold Bug, and thought it would be fun to emulate the treasure hunt. Once I'd found the manuscript, I realized I not only had the perfect prize in hand, but I could make amends to the ghost of Poe at the same time. Something that had been bothering Emily for the last week was nudged free as she listened to Mr. Griswold speak. What about Mr. Remora? Mr. Griswold sighed sadly. Yes, Mr. Remora. I am so sorry about Leon. I had no idea he could be capable of so much awfulness. He grimaced, his mustache folding into the deep lines of his face. He knows books and literary history incredibly well. I always forget that not all book people are good people. Emily tilted her head, surprised to hear that. Hollister had said nearly the same thing a couple of weeks ago. Mr. Griswold continued, I feel like I should have known or seen red flags, but when I have a game in the works, I can get obsessed, Jack offered. Mr. Griswold smiled. I was going to say hyper-focused. I get so intent on orchestrating my plans and keeping them a secret that I suppose I have a tendency to stop observing what's really going on around me. Like losing yourself in a good jam, Matthew said. Exactly. Mr. Griswold punctuated the word with a tap of his finger against the wheelchair arm. Emily still wasn't completely satisfied. Mr. Remora said that he found the Poe manuscript. He said that he deserved to be partners with you, 50-50. Mr. Griswold scoffed. Huh! Technically, he did find the manuscript. I suppose that part is true. I hired him to sort through and archive my family's papers and heirlooms, in addition to helping me with my book collection. I never expected to uncover a Poe manuscript, of course, but I knew there were some potential valuable or historically interesting items. I even had Mr. Remora sign a non-disclosure statement to assert that he would not divulge information he learned or claim ownership of anything in my possession. Not to mention, I compensated him for his work. Compensated him very well, in fact. But I don't think it was the money that ultimately mattered to him. It's okay. I think it was the glory of discovering a lost Poe. You and I would understand a bit of that, wouldn't we, Emily? The thrill and satisfaction of a treasure hunt. It's what Book Scavenger's all about. Well, not all about, she said. It's about a community of book lovers, too. And sharing books and adventures with friends. Her eyes flicked to James, and she felt shy all of a sudden, but he was smiling. Matthew elbowed her. And brothers. I think Mr. Remora knew that with me involved, Mr. Griswold continued. He'd only be a footnote in the story. Without me, he could orchestrate a different scenario for him to discover the work, thereby ensuring the spotlight would fully shine on himself. Emily had told herself she didn't believe Mr. Remora's claims about Mr. Griswold. But it wasn't until right now, hearing Mr. Griswold explain his side in person, that the weight of those negative words truly evaporated. There's something I still haven't figured out, James said. If you were really unconscious that whole time, then who was Raven? Was it Jack? Jack pointed to himself. Me? I've never even heard of Raven. Mr. Griswold chuckled. Raven is right here. He wheeled himself toward a bookcase that opened to reveal a small room filled with computer equipment. This is Raven, my virtual assistant. She's a computer program designed to assist players in the scavenger hunt. I knew it! James made a triumphant fist. I knew there was something weird about her. But why did you activate Raven if you weren't planning to start the game right away? The simple answer is, I wanted to cross it off my to-do list. Sounds silly, doesn't it? Mr. Griswold adjusted his glasses. Raven was programmed to reply to user queries only if they used the trigger phrase, the gold bug. Once you made that initial contact with Raven, she could respond to other questions. But she wouldn't interact with you without the first gold bug prompt. And so, because of that, and because nobody has ever posted about the gold bug in the history of the Book Scavenger, I activated Raven. I didn't anticipate it being a possibility that Raven would be put to work, because I wasn't planning to hide any copies of the gold bug until right before the game began. And so everything Raven told us was pre-programmed? Yes, Mr. Griswold said. She was set up to give specific clues or bits of information if someone used the right prompts. Oh, that's why she kept saying the same thing over and over whenever we wrote the gold bug, James mused. So why didn't she always reply? Emily said, thinking about the times she'd seen Raven's green online light, but didn't receive a response to her messages. I programmed Raven to answer 8 inquiries from a user at a time. If you used up all 8, then Raven wouldn't respond to you for another 48 hours. Just my attempt to be a little tricky. Mr. Griswold cleared his throat. Now it's time for us to get to the fun stuff, your prizes. Mr. Griswold explained that while the original Poe manuscript would be lent to a university collection, where it would be displayed in an exhibit and studied by scholars, Bayside Press would be publishing a copy of Poe's posthumous novel. Emily, James, and Matthew would split 10% of the royalties earned from the sale of the book, to be deposited in a scholarship fund for each of them. In addition, they were each gifted a laptop and invited to be founding members of a teen advisory board for the Book Scavenger website. I have one more token of appreciation in mind, but for now, I'd like to keep that a secret, Mr. Griswold said. You know, there was someone else who helped us, too. Emily spoke up a little shyly. She wasn't sure how Mr. Griswold would react to this. but she felt compelled to bring it up anyway. I think he's an old friend of yours?
Hollister.
Hollister? The corner of Mr. Griswold's mouth twitched as an unreadable emotion briefly waved across his face. Ah, Hollister, Mr. Griswold said softly. We haven't spoken in ages, I'm afraid. Well, it's never too late to reach out to someone. That's what he told me, actually. Mr. Griswold smiled. Did he now? That's sound advice. Very sound advice indeed.